Once upon a time, maybe about a decade ago or so, there was a king who was never quite ready. His name was King Norbert, and he ruled over a little kingdom that wasn't quite sure how it got there. Maybe they'd mull it over for a bit, figure out what they like their chances are, draw up a 5-year plan, memorize the national anthem, all that sort of thing. But Norbert just went back to sleep, and when the royal herald woke him up and told him he was king, he had to ask, "What? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I supposed to be doing something?" The Duchy of Limburg did invade, and he sent them a strongly worded letter telling them not to. And in the end, he was famous for never quite being ready, sending out invitations to important events 4 weeks late, having to stand in his brother's old clothes until a new wardrobe could be fitted, and always saying, "I should probably do something about that," but never actually doing it. Just give him a fortnight to think about it, everyone said. It'll wear off. But even then, Norbert only agreed to address it after he finished reorganizing his spice rack. It was only a matter of time before disaster struck. The chancellor stopped reading the letters after the 5th time. He'd gotten stuck on the second paragraph because he forgot to buy wax for the seal. And for once, Norbert was ready. And for the first time in anyone's memory, there was a beautiful rainbow over the castle. And everyone looked up and said, "See, I told you it was going to be fine." And then they all went back to their business except for Norbert, who stared up at the sky and said, "I'll have to write an inspirational poem about that." And then he never quite did. "Hold on," he said, "while I write down exactly how much trouble you're going to be when you decide to leave." Not being quite ready meant that nothing bad ever happened. I've given it a lot of thought, and I've come to the conclusion that I still don't want to be king. But I think the kingdom's ready. And so Norbert finally gave up his crown and became the worst king in the history of the world, which was also the best thing that ever happened to him. No one rebelled, no armies invaded. They couldn't even get the king to sign a bad law. And he was especially pleased with the neighboring king, whom he helped get his entire kingdom organized to the point where they could successfully rebel against him. "It's such a pleasure," said Norbert, "to see a system that makes sense." And so the kingdom thrived in spite of their king. And then Norbert never quite wrote it down. He did send for his brother Bartholomew, hoping that he could help, but Bartholomew was happily retired, running a jam factory, and didn't feel like giving up his jammy life to save the kingdom. "Tell him he can keep the crown," Bartholomew said, "but tell him to use butter pectin next time he makes jam. It's too runny." And then Norbert waved his hand dismissively and said, "We'll figure it out. You see, every king has to do unpleasant things from time to time, taxes, public appearances, saying no to foreign dignitaries. That is until one day when the neighbors finally had enough. But when you put it off long enough, you can usually avoid doing it altogether." And the longer the neighboring king waited, the more furious he got. But you know what? No one invaded in the history of the world. No one sat through 9 months of listening to the birds and watching their crops grow only to come back empty-handed. Eventually, the king went home to retire and spend his remaining days with a mistress who could tell him what he wanted to hear. For instance, wars tend to be pretty unpleasant, so most kings try to avoid them. But if you stall long enough, sometimes the other side gets bored and goes home. Same with treaties, ambassadors, marriage proposals, and even disasters. In fact, part of the royal training is learning how to say no without offending someone, how to diplomatically turn down a request, or gently suggest that someone else handle a problem. And unfortunately, Norbert was terrible at all of those. Norbert did attempt one major reform, namely allowing commoners to vote in elections. But that ended up on hold because he couldn't find the parchment that he liked for signing the edict. There were proposals of marriage for Lady Gwendolen, the princess, but Norbert always responded, "Let's get back to that in a fortnight." And it turned out that many of the kingdoms of the world had more faith in the teenage princess than they did in the indecisive king. And soon enough, every suitor was getting impatient with having to wait for Gwynlyn, while Norbert kept saying, "Give me a fortnight to think about it," and then forgetting that he had to think about it. Because Norbert was a man of half-packed suitcases, misplaced scrolls, and endless to-do lists. He was famous throughout the realm for one thing, being not quite ready. See, Norbert had an older brother, a very competent older brother who was well liked by everyone except, to be honest, himself. And get to the palace so they could be crowned, he just looked at them confused and said, "But I haven't even brushed my teeth yet." And then the council left and came back 3 hours later with a full set of royal robes, the crown jewels, a crown specifically made for his head shape, a thorough accounting of the state of the treasury, all the paperwork filled out, a military briefing, and a plate of toast with jam on it. "Good," said Norbert, because I was just getting ready to go. And then the council realized that they had their work cut out for them. One day, while demonstrating how to properly make jam in front of a crowd of courtiers, nobles, and visiting dignitaries, Brother Bartholomew decided that he had enough of being shoved at by the crown and gave up and abdicated in favor of Norbert. So now Norbert was king, and he hadn't even packed for this. Now, some might say the responsibility of ruling an entire nation would give someone pause. So when the royal council showed up in his chambers demanding that he put on clothes, they managed to get him to the palace, put the crown on his head, and just barely managed to stop him from correcting the herald's pronunciation before he could announce himself as king. And at the first council meeting, they tried to bring him up to speed on all the affairs of state. "Norbert," said the chancellor, "we have reason to believe that the Duchy of Limburg might be planning to invade us. What would you like to do?" Norbert blinked. "Oh, an invasion. I haven't written that fight in the budget. Give me a fortnight to think about it." The chancellor stared at him for a moment. "You know what? Forget I asked." But Norbert kept interrupting the meetings. "Oh, hold on. I need to alphabetize my book of royal decrees." And where were we? Ah, yes, the taxes. We'll want to put those off till next week. I have a dentist appointment. And what about those rumors that Duke Ludwig has designs on our southern territories? Oh, I wonder if we could convince him to take the western territories instead. I've always wanted a talking point that wasn't about war, famine, or death. If we could just pin the tail on the donkey of doom, we could finally have a nice Christmas party. Why are we looking at me like that? Have we not done a good job this year? And so Norbert went on, and things did not really change. In fact, it turned out that the only thing Norbert ever thought about was thinking about it. Now, this wouldn't necessarily have been a problem if Norbert wasn't so incompetent at putting things off. He was so bad at it, in fact, that the kingdoms around him eventually gave up on trying to get anything from him. In fact, disaster did strike, or rather 2 comets did strike, which led everyone to believe that the gods themselves were offended by the sight of a grown man wearing his pajamas in public. So the kingdom wobbled along under the dubious guidance of its indecisive leader, who spent his days composing deeply felt letters that never went out and his nights dreaming of efficiency, organization, and systems that made sense. The neighboring king marched a large army to the border and demanded that Norbert surrender his crown so they could all be ruled by a real king. And then he kept saying, "We'll figure it out," for about 9 months. And soon after, the comet returned. And when it passed, the sky was clear. After that, the people started to like Norbert. And after 18 years of constantly being told that he wasn't quite ready, Norbert finally assembled his council and said, everyone he did stay on as a consultant, though, helping other kings learn how to delay their responsibilities safely. And as for King Norbert, the not quite ready, his motto was always preparation is everything, but let's not rush it. Once upon a time in a Rome not too far from here, yet frustratingly unnamed by my script, there lived a procrastinator named Norbert. He was a prince then, or rather would be if he could keep his eyes open long enough to receive his title. He was still Prince Norbert then, third in line, blissfully tucked in beneath a blanket stitched with "someday, maybe." At precisely 9:13 a.m., a footman knocked with the urgency of a man who knew royal protocol, but had long given up on it, applying to Norbert. See, it wasn't Norbert's fault he was dim. The sun simply didn't rise often enough for such early morning duties, and he did everything it took to avoid those duties. His older brother, King Reginald, the decidedly overconfident, had abdicated after mistaking a vat of hot gooseberry jam for a diplomatic gift and sustaining third-degree burns on both pride and posterior. Norbert, now next in line, was dragged to the great hall, where the crown teetered impatiently on a velvet cushion. He must be decisive, declared Duchess Winifred, Queen Mother and staunch advocate of punctuality. This one's Julius Sneezer, because he sneezes a lot. Get it? Norbert beamed at them. The council stared. Duchess Winifred wept silently into a handkerchief. Bold, yes, agreed General Bodkin, whose military bearing was undermined by his habit of referring to himself in the third person. My son, said the Duchess, kneeling beside a mountain of bills, you have work to do. And above all, punctual. Where he'd been busily rewriting the national anthem to include more xylophones, and headed to the throne room to address his people. A crowd had gathered, many hoping against hope that today would be their lucky day. Their banners proclaimed, "Long live the king," and "Make parchment great again." Like knitting finger puppets, then came the morning that changed everything. The castle rooster crowed, though, as usual, King Norbert had the snooze bell. Unless the voice called, "You think we should bring forward that time General Bodkin accidentally shot a squirrel wearing a jaunty little hat? Or how about when the Duchess fell into the moat while trying to rescue a swan, but actually only managed to very lightly disturb the water lily? We are here because we believe our king has something to say to us." Or perhaps you'd prefer to hear about the siege of Castle Giblet when Lord Chamberlain bravely defended the honor of the realm by hiding under a woman's skirt. I was going to tell you about the time I sat on a pen. You know, when you sit on a pen and then you stand up and go, ow, 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 ow. But I see my son has beaten me to the punch, so go on, Norbert, surprise us. The crowd tittered at that. Come on, let's not judge up old hurts. Still, he worked diligently, confident that once he shared his brilliant edicts, the populace would rally behind him. After all, what were kings for if not making grandiose pronouncements from the comfort of their own palace? He didn't think much about what came after that part, because if he did, he might have hesitated before choosing decrees from the comfort of my own palace as his banner. But then again, maybe even that wouldn't have stopped him. How about when the royal pig ate all the ceremonial sausages? And it seemed everyone was content with that. Everyone except the Duchess, who looked out at the finished banner with quiet horror and whispered, "But if you don't want to wait, you can click right over here to watch this video instead." Or, just click on that one. Yeah, that'll be good. He means well, but that doesn't mean he isn't completely useless. Oh, or the time the royal pig gave birth to a litter of human babies. The first thing I shall do as your king is announce sweeping changes, comprehensive reforms, groundbreaking innovations. Then slowly, as if released from a dam, those erupted. They shook their fists and rattled their "bring back the hangman" signs. The crowd leaned forward expectantly. "I propose we modernize parchment storage," he said grandly. "In the meantime, I have drafted some other proclamations I'm sure you'll all enjoy. For example, have you ever pondered the precise mechanism by which enchanted objects become enchanted? My royal decrees will bring clarity to that age-old question. Or what about the vexing problem of runaway gargoyles? Fear not, for my decrees will solve it all." Norbert asked, frantically shoving a stray plum back into his mouth. "Your Majesty, you must come quickly," the footman said, trying to wedge open the door. "I was, running the kingdom on pure adrenaline." "Our rightful king," the voice corrected itself. "Bring him forward." The crowd roared its approval. Adrenaline was the new jam. "Oh, no, thank you," Norbert mumbled from under pillow. "I've got a busy, nap planned." But that morning, fate had overslept someone else. "Your Royal Highness, the kingdom awaits your coronation," said the Lord Chamberlain, flustered and fiddling with his ceremonial mace. "Right now? I mean, surely there's a waiting list." The second attempt was thwarted by rain. Rain, which the chronicler described as unfortunate, but which really just goes to show how insufficiently dramatic our dear chronicler was. The third attempt saw the entire court assembled and ready. Norbert appeared, looking dapper, if a little pale. He agreed to the oaths and rode the throne with solemnity until he paused midway through the ritual subjugation of the northern provinces to look up the word subjugate in his ceremonial copy of Webster's dictionary. By then, the populace had grown used to referring to him as King Norbert-ish. And so commenced 3 spectacular failures of coronation. The first attempt was foiled when the Bishop of Ceremonies arrived, but Norbert refused to emerge until he located one of his ceremonial boots. And thus the royal council convened in the Tower of Strategy to decide what to do with this new unconsummated monarch. They found him in the royal herb garden, naming snails after famous historical figures. So they gathered around him again, this time in his chambers, where piles of unsorted mail threatened to engulf the room. "Later," he said without looking up, absorbed in arranging his rubies by shade. "You must learn the duties of king," persisted General Bodkin, pushing an armful of invoices toward Norbert. "I will," Norbert promised vaguely, before returning to his gems. And so went the next fortnight until finally, on Norbert's first official day, he rose from his desk in the royal scriptorium. Norbert waved from the top of the stairs. "Good morning, everyone," he called down. "Sorry I'm late." "What brings you all here today?" Norbert inquired, genuinely curious. "We want our king," boomed a voice from below. "Who, me?" Norbert squeaked, instinctively pressing himself against the wall like a scared badger. "Who else? Who else would we bring forward?" "That was just one time," muttered the Lord Chamberlain. "Enough," the Duchess snapped. "You can stop blushing now, General." "Well, that's certainly true," said the Duchess, clearing her throat. He hesitated. "Surprise you how?" "With a proclamation," she said. "A bold pronouncement that lets us know the sort of king you intend to be." And in that moment, inspiration struck him. "Of course," he said with a flourish. "Why didn't I think of this before?" Applause was cut short when he added, "But I'll need a few weeks to finalize the font." The crowd blinked. Undeterred, Norbert continued. His audience remained unconvinced. As days turned into weeks, Norbert's royal decrees took so long to materialize that messengers began bringing sandwiches on delivery runs. At last, he unfurled it above the ramparts, along with a smaller banner that read, "Coming soon." And so the kingdom waited, and we are waiting. Hello, Part 2. The Kingdom Wobbles. Scene 1. The Council of Advisors. For the sake of balance and stability, the lords and ladies of the realm sat for hours on end in a room with 4 walls and no windows, lest any ideas come in or out. Duke Thaddeus, "Sire, what will you do?" "You cannot just sit there being indecisive while everyone else decides." Norbert, "I'm trying, but indecision is my fort. Just look at all these options." So many decisions, so little time to make them. The council members consulted their pocket-sized charts, showing all possible combinations of actions and reactions. Lady Adelaide, then, according to the chart, "If we pretend to listen to the Queen Mother's advice, then hedge against the Duke of Flibble's plan by 2 weeks, we'll end up somewhere around here, hopefully." As they looked on their chart, the door opened and messenger pigeons flew through, flapping their tiny wings furiously. First messenger, Sire, an invasion force from Turkvania has crossed the river. They demand surrender of the Squishlands within 3 days. Everyone gasped. Second messenger, actually, make that 2.5 days. They're in a hurry. Norbert, 3 days? That's hardly enough time to pick the correct sealing wax. All eyes turned to Duchess Winifred, whose job it was to worry about things like sealing wax. Duchess Winifred, Stormy Indigo would look good. And so it was decided. Norbert would stall for time while the others prepared the defense of the Squishlands. Scene 2, the Squishlands. The Squishlands were a strip of mud that changed ownership every spring flood. It was hotly contested by Turkvania because it made a good duck pond. Scene 3, the ultimatum. Upon receiving the messenger pigeon, Norbert retreated to his bedroom to ponder the future of his realm. Norbert, to fight or not to fight, ham, eggs or spam. This decision weighs heavy on my heartstrings. The general paced outside, watching the clock tower tick. General Botkin, he's playing some kind of long game. Norbert, or maybe he's just running out of ribbon. After a few days of extensive soul-searching, Norbert emerged from his chambers, having made a decision. Norbert, I have decided to write a letter. He composed a message on wax paper, sealed it with a wax seal, and sent it off. General Botkin, but sir, you haven't even written it yet. Norbert, exactly. Now we wait. Scene 4, the threat of war. A messenger burst through the doors, panting. Messenger, Sire, an answer from Turkvania. They demand surrender of the Squishlands within 3 days. But when Norbert went to check the mailbox, there was nothing there. Between Stormy Indigo and Pensive Plum, the king agonized. Meanwhile, the people of Turkvania grew increasingly restless. Their King Harold stomped his foot and threw a tantrum. Norbert, 3 days? That's hardly enough time to pick the correct sealing wax. Rather than respond, Norbert spent the next week in deep deliberation over his choice of ink. Harold, why aren't they surrendering? Did we send the right messenger? Make him poop his pants, hurry. So a new messenger was dispatched. He sealed it with a wax stamp, though not the one he'd chosen, and sent it off. His army packed up and headed home, muttering about stupid tricks played by crafty little gnome kings. New messenger. Sorry, wrong package. I think I dropped the other one. Finally, after agonizing over which color of wax to use, Norbert wrote his letter. Meanwhile, King Harold of Turkvania had grown so impatient, he withdrew the threat and assumed it was a trap. General Botkin, he's playing some kind of long game. Norbert, I don't know what you're talking about. All I did was write a letter. Scene 5, the royal marriage that didn't happen. To secure peace and stability, the council thought it best if Norbert married. Duchess Winifred, a strong union will forge a strong alliance. They considered various princesses, but eventually settled on Princess Hortense of Blunderborg, famous for her strong chin and unusually loud nose-blowing. I had a sudden craving for crumpets, and I woke up feeling medium. Norbert sighed in relief and returned to organizing his drawer of urgent-ish scrolls. Each time the princess would ask, "Are you sure you wouldn't rather just marry me without all the meetings?" And each time Norbert would say, I can't decide. Duchess Winifred, this is a strategic match. We must secure the alliance. Norbert, indeed. But I really ought to get to know her before committing to forever. What's her stance on gooseberry jam? The Duchess winced, then pulled out a fixed schedule of events. Duchess Winifred, well, we've scheduled meetings for you to get to know her. Only a few minor details remain, like what counts as upper middlish-lower class, how much is a bindle worth, and is a goose considered property or livestock? The result? The previous chaotic but familiar tax code remained in place. However, since no one enforced it during the transition, The peasants accidentally enjoyed a 3-year tax holiday. Norbert, meetings. My least favorite? I hate those. Over the next 6 months, Norbert canceled each meeting for reasons including too breezy. Finally, after 6 months of delays, Princess Hortense eloped with a local bagpipe instructor. The vizier assumed this was a power move and nervously agreed to return in a fortnight. Scene 6, the tax reform that nobody noticed. Oh, I'm really too busy right now. Come back next Thursday. This continued for another month until the vizier, desperate to get home, offered twice as many concessions. Finally, Norbert signed the agreement. Eager to be seen as a progressive and reform-minded monarch, Norbert announced sweeping changes to the tax code. Norbert, henceforth, a fairer, simpler tax system shall govern our realm. Taxes had mysteriously dropped. The kingdom hadn't gone to war, and the king didn't shout or throw goblets, just occasionally misplaced them. He formed 6 committees, assigned 3 advisors to each, then forgot about them. Peasant, long live King Norbert. He forgets to charge us. Scene 7, the diplomatic victory that took too long to lose. The Grand Vizier of the East arrived with a large entourage, demanding concessions to trade. Vizier, we require a swift agreement or we walk away. Norbert, certainly. Let me just find my spectacles. Where are my readers? While the vizier waited patiently for an hour, Norbert shuffled papers, looking for something to sign. Vizier, we don't actually have all day. Norbert, oh dear, where's the folder marked probably important? I'm sure it's in here somewhere. With his schedule completely blocked for the next 2 months, Norbert told the vizier, why don't you just come back next Thursday? However, when the vizier came back the next week, Norbert said, Scene 8, public perception turns. Though palace insiders remained baffled, the common folk began to adore Norbert. Nothing terrible had happened. A group of citizens formed the Not Quite Party, promoting the virtues of mildness, delay, and never committing to anything fully. Banner at a rally, hesitation for the nation. Chant, 2 cheers for Norbert. This is a throne room. This is a king, and this is how he rules his kingdom, through doing absolutely nothing. But also kind of everything, I guess. Welcome to my channel. His advisors try talking him into doing stuff, but he just keeps putting it off. So they stop asking him to do anything and start telling him what he is gonna do instead. But it is a fun little story about how these 3 make Norbert look like a good king, even though he really has no clue what is going on. None of them have fallen out of a window yet, and the kingdom is prospering. He then declares that the sanitation systems of Norberton will be overhauled, again, because Norbert spilled tea on the veto scroll, and it kind of looked like a yes. If Norbert doesn't respond to a proposal within a set period of time, they move forward with the project as if he had given it the royal stamp of approval. Every decision, big or small, will be added to the list of things the king has done, and he will get full credit for it. Finally, he announces that the royal court will begin using paperless administration after Norbert misplaced the entire supply of ink. He wants to rebel against Norbert, and he is tired of waiting for the king to do something to justify it. He is preparing to march his army south to overthrow Norbert when General Bakken shows up with a handful of sheep. What? Asks the Duke. Is this a trick? Nope, says Bakken. The king sends his regards. With that, Bodkin drops to one knee and surrenders the sheep to the Duke, who accepts them graciously. Soon, royalty from across the world send representatives to visit the king. The king of Glambodia brings his top diplomats to learn the secrets of Norbertian diplomacy. Well, we started with a bang. We followed a young man into battle, learned the value of friends and family, and found out what it means to be a hero. Then we cut to the next scene, and it all changed. And now our hero is dead and his kingdom is in shambles. Oh, and also a ton of side quests. Thanks for watching. I'm the host. If you want to watch more of my content, you can do that here. If you want to listen to my audio content, you can do that here. If you want to support my work, you can do that here. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. We followed a frantic princess through dark forests and uncharted dungeons. We fought monsters and solved puzzles and faced the evils of unchecked capitalism. But in the end, we found out that it was all for nothing. Our hero is dead and his kingdom is still in shambles. The Queen of Ditheria invites Norbert to speak at a conference on the art of gentle avoidance. And a dignitary from a far-off land presents Norbert with a golden alarm clock, presumably as a joke. Grizzlethump figured Norbert would send reinforcements to protect the border, so he was prepared to fight. She says, "Sire, you've ruled for 5 years. You have kept Norberton safe and prosperous, peaceful without incident, without doing anything. We fought alongside heroes from another time, blasting skeletons and dragons alike with shotguns. We learned of the heroic efforts of an ancient wizard and watched in awe as he used his staff to turn a wheel of cheese. And through it all, we remembered the most important lesson of all. No matter how bleak things seem, there's always hope for a slightly less bleak future." Norbert slowly opens his eyes and replies, "It's quite a skill. Do you know how hard it is to not act, to stay out of the way, to wait until the moment passes?" Winifred realizes that all these years she has been running the kingdom, thinking that Norbert was a reluctant ruler, hiding behind the advice of his council when all along he was just bad at his job. "Are you saying," she asks, "this was intentional?" Norbert grins sheepishly. "Oh, heavens, no. I just hate making decisions." But if he was being sincere, well, that sounded like a trap. There was no way he'd fall for it. Winifred says this is an excellent opportunity to update royal correspondence to a more modern format. Turns out the whole army had grown tired of waiting around for something to happen. They'd seen no movement from the royal army and they didn't want to sit around forever. So they all snuck away in the night and surrendered to the first thing they came across. A flock of sheep happened to be walking by, so they gave up and went home. Grizzlethump face-palmed. Of course, Norbert wouldn't send an army. Why did he think this would be any different? Well, he asked the shepherd, suppose they were expecting a royal response. They got wool instead. As the Duke walked away, dejected and defeated, he heard Norbert say, "Sometimes stillness is mightier than the sword," before falling asleep. Basically, they go ahead and do everything themselves and then retroactively pretend that the king did it. But they still need to put on a show every now and then let someone find out the king as just a fraud. Merchants invent a form of bookkeeping called guest counting, and artists paint murals of Norbert doing nothing, very lifelike. Theirs is a golden age. Children sing songs about the king who forgot his trousers and brushed his hair, and somehow still managed to rule accidentally, and somehow that works better. Now, look, this might seem insane, but when your king is basically a glorified figurehead, that's how kingdoms work. He has to consider his thoughts, review probable decisions, stare thoughtfully from the tower, potentially wave at something. You get the idea. The rest of the council members fill those time slots with whatever they want to do while they re there. Usually it's the same thing, but sometimes it changes. Things happen whether the king wants them to or not. Instead, he's in the gardens tending to his collection of hedgehogs. He's tied tiny ribbons onto their spines and named them all according to a complex ranking system he created. This is Sir Prickly of the Thistle Order, the bravest knight in his knighthood. Look at him go. Okay, back in the council chambers, everyone is pretending to listen intently as Winifred describes her vision for the future. Suddenly, Norbert runs in holding 2 hedgehogs. Everyone stares at him expectantly. He says, "This one as Sir Prickly of the Thistle Order, and this one's as Lady Reginald of the Brambles Brigade. Very brave hedgehogs." "Right, I guess I'll see you later then." The others sigh as they return to their activities. So why not take the pressure off poor old Norby boy and let those things happen faster? That's the argument made by these three. Today we are looking at a brand new kingdom in a world that has been rebalanced so that kings can be as lazy as possible. As soon as our boy Norbert takes the throne, things start going wrong. First up, we have Duchess Winifred. She acts as the de facto leader of the kingdom. Whenever she proposes a plan, Norbert just sort of agrees to it. And since he's the king, he gets credit for all the good ideas. Winfried comes up with next. We have General Botkin, the military leader of the kingdom. Botkin knows that Norbert would never raise a finger to defend the realm, so he just does it himself. He marshals armies to victory, crushing rebellions and waging war, all without ever asking for permission. And finally, there's Chancellor Bibber, the royal accountant. Bibber doesn't ask Norbert for funds to pay the troops, or buy supplies, or renovate the castle. He just does it. And then he writes down a note saying, these costs will be deducted from the king's allowance. And now these three run the kingdom and the people love it. So yeah, this isn't exactly a story about the importance of following orders. 2 years have passed since the great rebalancing and things are going well. All of Norbert's advisors are getting along great. In the Royal Council meeting, Chancellor Bibber stands up to announce that Norbert has accidentally approved a trade agreement with the dwarves of Delve and Fork, mostly by not replying to a letter in time. So one day, the scribes come up with a system to keep track of all of Norbert's non-decisions. They establish what is called the Norbert method. Next, we have to address Norbert's royal schedule. It's packed full of activities and responsibilities that are deliberately left vague. One sunny afternoon, Norbert has been scheduled to reflect on future policy. Meanwhile, somewhere in the northern mountains, Duke Grizzlethump is growing impatient. When Grizzlethump turned back to his men, they had vanished. In fact, they'd been gone for weeks. Botkin walked up to Norbert and said, "You tripped over that wisdom accidentally, didn't you?" Norbert opened one eye. "Absolutely." Years pass, and the people of Norbertonia are thriving. Farmers develop crop rotation techniques because they don't have to wait for royal permission. But even as the people of Norbertonia grow prosperous, news of Norbert's strange behavior spreads to neighboring lands. One day, Duchess Winifred approaches a quietly meditating Norbert. And that is the end of part 3. How did we get here? Yet, even as we look to the future, we remembered where we came from. Thank you for watching. I'm the host. Join me next time for more stories of heroism, heart-pounding action, and political intrigue.